As Mike Tyson takes a peaceful afternoon walk, a racist cop, Officer Bradley, spots him and, filled with prejudice, decides to confront him. What starts as a routine intimidation quickly escalates when Bradley, in a reckless display of power, punches Mike in the face, but the cop has no idea who he just provoked. As the crowd watches in shock, Mike Tyson prepares to deliver a lesson no one will ever forget. Subscribe and like this video to see how the story unfolds. Amidst the hustle and bustle of city life, the afternoon rush had the metropolis humming with activity. The cacophony of honking cars punctuated the symphony of human chatter and laughter, while throngs of pedestrians navigated the labyrinthine sidewalks. The eclectic scents of various street vendors, from mouth-watering street foods to the sweet aroma of fresh brewed coffee, mingled in the air, adding to the city's lively atmosphere. In the midst of the bustling cityscape, a man strode with purposeful strides, the epitome of calm amidst the storm. His black-collared t-shirt hugged his broad shoulders, accentuating his well-defined physique. It was none other than Mike Tyson, the once feared boxer, now a seasoned veteran of life's journey. As he walked, his movements exuded an air of effortless confidence, his shoulders swaying with each step, as if he were gliding across the pavement. Tyson's presence, though understated and almost casual in its demeanor, attracted discreet attention from passers-by. The knowledge of his prowess in the ring, his legendary status etched into the annals of history, made people whisper in hushed excitement and avert their gaze in deference. It was as though his mere existence commanded reverence, his air of invincibility and the aura of a warrior once honed in the ring, now imbued in his every step. With the leisurely pace of a man with time on his hands, Tyson reached a crosswalk, his steps slowing to a halt as he pulled out his phone from his pocket. A well-practiced move that required no conscious thought, Tyson's fingers danced across the screen with a familiarity that spoke of daily habit. Checking his messages, he nodded slightly, confirming his upcoming appointment with a nod of acknowledgement. But for now, Tyson was content to be immersed in the city's rhythm, his strides matching the beat of the busy streets. On the opposite side of the street, a humble diner with its retro neon sign cast its flickering light onto the patrol car parked in front. Inside the cruiser, Officer Bradley, a burly man with the demeanor of a seasoned veteran and a crew cut that screamed no nonsense, sat with his coffee. The faint aroma of the hot brew wafted through the vehicle, intermingling with the scent of motor oil and old leather. But Bradley didn't savor the beverage. Bradley's badge may have been a symbol of his authority, but it was also a tool he wielded with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a butcher. Years on the force had not mellowed his disdain for those he deemed as unworthy, his jaded perspective turning into a weapon with which he struck down those who, in his eyes, didn't belong, and as he sipped his coffee, his gaze zeroed in on a familiar face across the street. Mike Tyson. Like a hawk eyeing its prey, Bradley's scrutiny intensified. To Bradley, Tyson's mere presence in this part of the city seemed to scream defiance, a challenge to the unspoken rules of acceptable behavior in his eyes. The raw power emanating from Tyson's broad frame, his confident stride, and the legacy that preceded him all seemed to ignite a sense of unease in Bradley's mind, his thoughts colored by a prejudice that refused to see the man beyond the stereotype of a big, powerful black man. The sudden whine of sirens sliced through the urban noise, piercing the air like a sonic blade. From behind the wheel, Bradley stepped out of his cruiser with the deliberate poise of a predator, his footsteps measured and calculated. The moment his polished shoe touched the sidewalk, Bradley's hand settled onto his belt, the gesture intended to be a subtle yet unmistakable threat to the man on the other side of the street, Tyson. With a voice hardened by years on the force and a contemptuous smirk curling his lips, Bradley called out. Bradley, his voice boomed across the space between them. "Hey, you!" The words, sharp and accusatory, carried the weight of authority and implied guilt. Tyson, still a few feet away, his demeanor calm yet alert, turned towards the source of the sound. For a moment, silence fell between them, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft chink of handcuffs on Bradley's belt, as if foreshadowing a possible outcome. Tyson, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to one of mild surprise, raised his eyebrows at the address. "Me?" "Yeah, you." Bradley's words, edged with a sharp hint of authority and dismissal, dripped with condescension as if addressing a delinquent rather than a man enjoying a casual stroll. "What are you doing around here?" Bradley continued, his voice curt and uncompromising, his stance conveying a silent accusation of wrongdoing even before any crime had been alleged. Tyson, his confusion turning to incredulity, merely stated the obvious: walking. But Bradley, undeterred, scoffed with derision, his approach relentless as he closed the gap between them. "You got business here? You look like you're up to something." The insinuation was unmistakable, his posture radiating a thinly veiled contempt that almost seemed to demand an admission of guilt. Tyson, having dealt with the likes of Bradley in the past, recognized the familiar pattern of behavior unfolding before him. With a weary sigh, he collected himself, his movements deliberate yet measured. His shoulders, though squared and broad, seemed to slump slightly under the weight of a lifetime of racial profiling and microaggressions. The frustration, the exhaustion of having to prove his innocence over and over again, threatened to bubble to the surface, but Tyson held his ground, determined to maintain his composure despite the blatant injustice. Tyson's response was even-keeled, his tone level and his posture purposefully non-threatening. "I'm just minding my business, man. Is there a problem?" Bradley, unfazed by Tyson's composure, returned his question with a smirk that twisted his lips in a cruel mockery of understanding. "You tell me," Bradley replied, his eyes scanning Tyson's frame as if searching for the proof of a crime that hadn't yet been committed. "You don't look like you belong around here." As the verbal sparring between Tyson and Bradley intensified, the urban landscape shifted, its inhabitants awakening to the drama unfolding before them. In the moments that passed, the usually indifferent crowd that bustled about their daily routines suddenly seemed to slow, their movements and actions now infused with a collective awareness of the gathering storm. Heads turned, eyes widened, and murmurs spread like wildfire, each conversation fueling the growing speculation as to what was really happening. The street had suddenly transformed into a stage, and the spotlight shone on the two men at its center. Tyson, shaking his head in a mix of disappointment and annoyance, turned on his heel, his muscular frame radiating a silent resolve. "I don't have time for this," he said, his words terse yet dignified, as he took a step forward, intending to continue on his way. Bradley's voice, oozing with barely concealed malice, cut through the quiet murmur of the crowd. "Yeah, I bet you don't," he sneered, his tone biting with contempt as his hand, which had been hovering over his belt, finally came to rest on the cold metal of his police baton. The atmosphere shifted, the subtle menace in Bradley's words casting a dark shadow over the scene. In one swift, brutal motion, Bradley's fist, propelled by rage and the arrogant belief in his own authority, launched towards Tyson's jaw. The sound of flesh striking flesh reverberated through the street, a primal, gut-wrenching impact that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. It was a punch designed not just to inflict pain, but to humiliate, to assert dominance over a man who, in Bradley's mind, had dared to question his authority. The explosive impact sent ripples of shock and horror through the onlookers, their reactions a symphony of gasps and cries of dismay. One woman, overcome with fear and disbelief at the brutality unfolding before her, let out a piercing scream, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle her own horror. In the midst of the chaos, one bystander, seemingly immune to the panic that had engulfed the crowd, whipped out their phone, capturing the moment with a cold, dispassionate detachment. Tyson's head, snapped to one side by the force of Bradley's blow, swung back around like the pendulum of a clock, its slow, deliberate movement betraying the white-hot fury that now simmered beneath his stoic facade. His jaw tightened, a steely determination taking hold as he fixed his gaze upon the officer with eyes that seemed to have gone from a stormy gray to a pitch-black abyss. Tyson, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, took a breath that seemed to expand his chest like a bellows. The exhalation that followed was a low, menacing rumble, like the foreboding growl of a lion about to strike. "All right, man, you asked for it," Tyson's words, laced with an icy determination, seemed to hang in the air. In the blink of an eye, Tyson's right fist rocketed forward, colliding with Bradley's stomach like a wrecking ball. Bradley, caught off guard and ill-prepared for the brutal onslaught that ensued, staggered backwards, his eyes widening in shock and alarm as he realized the gravity of the situation he'd unwittingly provoked. The punch to his stomach had stolen his breath, leaving him wheezing and off balance, a far cry from the smug superior officer he'd been just moments ago. Tyson, relentless in his assault, closed the distance between himself and Bradley, each step reverberating with the power and ferocity of a freight train. His left hook, delivered with the force of a battering ram, connected with Bradley's ribs, eliciting a sickening crack that caused the officer to double over in agony. The crowd, caught up in the spectacle unfolding before them, erupted into a chorus of cheers and shouts, their frenzy heightened by the adrenaline-fueled clash. Bradley, his face contorted with desperation and pain, instinctively lunged for his baton, his hand grasping for the slender metal weapon, like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. But Tyson, anticipating the move, closed his massive hand around Bradley's wrist with a crushing grip that elicited a cry of anguish from the officer. The baton, a useless tool in the hands of its intended user, clattered to the ground, rolling away with a hollow thud that seemed to echo Bradley's futility. Tyson, the warrior now fully unleashed his fury with a ferocious growl. "You think you can just punch people for nothing?" His words dripped with contempt, cutting through the air like a well-honed blade. "You want to be a bully?" Tyson continued, his eyes ablaze with a warrior's fire. "Let's see how tough you really are." Tyson's grip tightened around Bradley's collar, his massive hand closing around the fabric like a vice. With a powerful heave, he hoisted the officer up, his feet dangling helplessly off the ground like a rag doll in the grips of a giant. Bradley, his shock and panic overcoming his bravado, thrashed wildly, his flailing limbs futile against the sheer strength of the man who held him aloft. "Put me down!" he yelled, his voice betraying the fear that now threatened to consume him. Tyson's smirk twisted into a cruel, triumphant grin, his eyes sparkling with the savage delight of a predator savoring its prey. "You sure?" His mocking tone dripped with venom, as if relishing Bradley's predicament. Then, with a controlled, almost casual force, Tyson shoved the officer backwards, the powerful thrust sending Bradley stumbling over the curb and crashing down onto his back with a resounding thud. The crowd, until now mostly observers, erupted in a maelstrom of cheers, hoots, and hollers, their excitement boiling over into a frenzy of adulation and support for the man who had just taught their tormentor a well-deserved lesson. The din of their voices, raised in a chaotic chorus of approval, filled the air, a cacophonous celebration of Tyson's righteous triumph over the bully who had terrorized them for so long. As Tyson stood, calm and impervious to the chaos swirling around him, a siren's wail cut through the cheers of the crowd, heralding the arrival of more officers, drawn to the scene by the commotion. The newcomers, their uniforms a sharp contrast to the jubilation of the spectators, took in the scene with a mixture of shock and bewilderment. Their eyes flicked from the defeated Bradley, sprawled on the ground, to Tyson, who seemed almost untouchable, his stance exuding a quiet confidence. The senior officer, his expression a mask of professionalism and curiosity, approached Tyson with a hesitant step, seemingly aware of the man's reputation. "Mr. Tyson," the officer began, his tone neutral but cautious, "what happened here?" Tyson, his eyes meeting the officer's gaze with a cold intensity, responded with a simple gesture, his arms sweeping across the assembled crowd. The crowd, emboldened by Tyson's gesture, erupted into a chaotic chorus of accusations, their voices overlapping in a storm of indignation. "He attacked Mike first," one bystander shouted, their voice a sharp, accusatory blade in the melee of voices. Another, his eyes flashing with righteous anger, joined in, "That cop threw the first punch. Mike was just defending himself." The senior officer, his face a mask of steely professionalism, turned to Bradley with a look of disgust, his voice laced with the authority of his rank. "You're done." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, their finality undeniable. Bradley, his bravado and confidence abandoned in the face of the consequences of his actions, stammered a feeble protest. "Wait, what?" he said, his face paling as reality dawned on him. The senior officer, his words now as icy as a frozen pond, delivered the verdict with a surgical precision that left no room for protest. "You're suspended pending investigation," the officer stated, his tone leaving no doubt about the gravity of the situation. The crowd, their cheers now giving way to murmurs of approval, watched with a mixture of satisfaction and grim amusement as Bradley struggled to accept the consequences of his actions. Bradley, his shoulders slumped and his spirit broken, met Tyson's unwavering gaze with a defeated look, all traces of his usual bravado replaced by the barest glimmer of fear like a rabbit staring into the jaws of a wolf. Tyson, satisfied with the outcome, let a satisfied smile curl across his lips, his knuckles cracking with an audible snap. "Lesson learned," he muttered, as he watched Bradley slink away, shoulders bowed and head hung low, an ignominious end to his reign of terror. As Bradley retreated into obscurity, chased away by the jeers and derision of those he had once tormented, Tyson, his head held high and his pride intact, resumed his walk down the street, his confident gait amplified by the cheers and applause of the adoring crowd. The onlookers, once mere bystanders, now a band of supporters clustered around their newly anointed hero, their voices raised in celebration of his victory. The very streets themselves seemed to echo with these words as Tyson departed, his silhouette fading into the distance like a mythic hero borne away by the admiring crowds. Prejudice and power should never mix. A solemn declaration, ringing in the air with a resolute conviction. Strength isn't about abusing authority, the message continued, its words reverberating through the streets like the beating of a war drum. It's about standing up for what's right,